What is the connection between wishes and intention?
Well, certainly there is an intention that goes into a wish, right? I talk about, and I strongly recommend what I call the three P's. That the wish should be peaceful, positive, and purposeful. The wish should be positive. So instead of wishing against or wishing protesting is wishing against, really, we need to be wishing for. We need to be uniting for world peace. Imagine you're driving home and you have this image of a blue balloon in your driveway. Like you just get this pop-up of an image of the blue balloon. And then you go home and you drive up and guess what? There's a blue balloon in your driveway. What happened?
Welcome to the Light the Day podcast, where we explore spiritually transformative experiences. I have a really special guest for you today, but before we get to that, a reminder again to like the video, to subscribe, to hit that bell if you're on YouTube so you get the notifications when new things come out. I'm on here two or three times a week. This is one of the, once a week we have this podcast where we have guests talking about really interesting topics. And today is no different. So today I have Brownell Landrum. Hi, Brownell.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here. We're going to have fun.
We are. I am really, really excited about this conversation. I think we're going to go in some really interesting directions today. So, before we get started into your story, share a little bit about you and what you're currently working on.
Okay. Well, again, I'm Brownell Landrum. I'm the only Brownell Landrum in the world, so that says something. I write fiction and nonfiction. I kind of consider myself a storyteller. I also kind of consider myself an explorer of metaphysical mysteries, so I like getting into really interesting topics. I've written several novels. My most recent trilogy was like this epic reincarnation mystery and love story about a famous couple reunited today to fulfill a prophecy, like a Da Vinci Code, reincarnation Da Vinci Code type of mystery with a love story in it. And that came out about a year and a half ago. And then about 6 months ago, I came out with a semi-autobiographical novel. It's called A Love Story to the Universe. And we'll talk about that because that's a big part of like all these weird spiritual stuff that's been happening to me related to that. And that actually led me to write my latest book, which is called The Art and Science of Wishing. And I was creating this magical world. I called it Astrea and like upstairs. And my semi-autobiographical novel is written from the point of view of the upstairs. So it's like if they're up here and they're looking down at us, this is their perspective. And I was writing about wishes. Was creating this wishing realm. And then one night I'm listening to a lecture on neuroplasticity. And I'm like, wait a minute, is there science in wishing? And that's what led to all of that. So I'm kind of all over the place. Like I'm into the fiction and nonfiction and like the science part because I think that's really, really fun. But wishing itself is fun. And, in my book, I researched 70 different scientists. So, I mean, I really got into the science aspect. And I just think the more we bring the science and the spirituality stuff together, the more we can unite because everybody wishes everywhere, all over the world. So it's kind of a common thing, whether you're into science or whether you're into the spirituul stuff. So
I
I
love
guess
that
that's the
because,
headlines.
yeah, because when you were explaining that, what I saw was a Venn diagram of the fictional, the nonfiction, the science, and how it all comes together. Because we certainly are seeing that the we're seeing the reality show up in science fiction, for example.
Yes.
We think about we certainly haven't created the world of the Jetsons, which I grew up with.
Yeah, yeah.
But in some ways we have. In some ways, the food that just popped out, like that's our microwave, right?
Yeah, there's a lot that actually I did some research into that, like these fictional people writing stories that end up being coming true, and whether they were prophetic, which we can talk about blue balloons if you want to, because that's a really trippy topic, which is kind of related to this. Um, but yeah, the things that the lot of things come out of the minds of the science fiction writers. And then the other question to that is, and where did they get the idea? Like, how was that fed to them? And that's a fun topic. But yeah, the more we bring these things together, I think this is where you're going. It's like there's spiritual stuff that's being proven by science, and science stuff that's being found out and woven into the spiritual, and the blending of these is just really fun. Like you sit there and you think, okay, if you believe this is the answer and it's a spiritual answer, science has been delving into those same questions and having answers that don't conflict so much like we thought they would. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm finding that even in and just from a novice's perspective, like I don't have any medical background to speak of, but I find that even in the realm of medicine is a lot of times what they are measuring is actually energy.
Right.
And it's but they would anyway, I don't want to get too far off of field before we dive into your story. So let's go back and share a little bit about what spirituality meant to you as a child. Did you have like a religious background? Did you have any draw to the spiritual growing up?
I grew up an Episcopalian, which I really am always been thankful for because it was a nice, lovely kind of, framework of religion that's not so strict religion, right? It's probably one of the most open-minded denominations that you can get. And therefore, and my dad actually served as a deacon for the church, but then he was also very much a very practical kind of person. So he wasn't into the woo-woo. And I remember in high school, one of the things actually that I kind of write in the wishing book is something I went to a talk when I was in high school at the church, and they talked about how prayers are answered. And one of the things that has been the driver, again, not to keep weaving back the wishing book, but it's like I had to look at the difference between a wish, a prayer, and a goal, right? And those are so different. So there was that foundation of that, and going to church, with my parents, and some of my family members, but I probably went more than others. Um, and it was pretty traditional though. Like I remember the first time somebody mentioned that whole concept of religion, I was like, nope, it's not mentioned in the church, so therefore I don't believe it. And that was the rule, right?
Hmm.
I never even thought about bringing it up because it just felt like, I hadn't, heard about that. And then it wasn't, I don't know how much longer after that, but I started getting some kind of awareness. Like Shirley MacLaine was a big opener for a lot of us. Richard Bach before that, right, opened a lot of minds. His books, Illusions and The Bridge Across Forever, were really foundational books for me in terms of a whole way of looking at the world and all of that.
And he wrote Jonathan Livingston Seagull,
He
which
did.
I am currently rereading right now
Oh yeah.
because I read that probably when I was in high school, I want to say.
I was in junior high, so I'm probably a little older than you. And yeah, I mean, I remember actually we read it in school, but I don't remember it being about reincarnation in school. But
It's
it is pretty much about reincarnation, you know? So like what
yeah,
were they teaching us?
it has a lot of those different themes, but interesting that you read it in school. I didn't read it in school. I just read it on my own and this theme of just individuality and kind of breaking out of the mold and that certainly isn't what school teaches. So it's interesting that you
I know.
that you read
I'm
that in
just like
school.
so I was like that teacher was cool without even me knowing like how they got it into the school, but I definitely remember it in school. And so it was kind and I guess that there's also the kind of the good and the bad because if it's taught in school, then it's maybe not as cool as if if you found it on your own like contraband, like, oh, I don't want
Yeah.
anybody to know I'm reading it. Like you are at
Yeah.
that age, right? Like if
Yeah.
it's sanctioned by the school, it may not be as cool. But no, that was that, and I remember that. But there was Illusions, the one that really the Adventures of a Reluctant Messiah. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah.
And
Interesting.
where he meets this guy who's like this reluctant Messiah, and they just the wisdom that came through. And then the one he wrote, The Bridge Across Forever, about his how he met his wife. And I mean, that book, in fact, I keep wishing they put it out, wishing, here's me wishing, but wishing they put it out in an audiobook because, I'd like to hear it. I never heard it in
Mm.
audiobook, always read the book, and I have the book, but it was just so amazing. So yeah, so then the Shirley MacLaine, and she did that mini series. I don't know if you remember that, the Out on the Limb. So, and I was like, that
Yeah.
was happening. And then at the same kind of time, and I don't know which kind of chicken or egg, but I was having memories that I realized were past life memories. And I think that was one of the big openings for me was as far as that kind of aspect of spirituality, that was a big one for me.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring up past life memories, and I would love for you to share some of those experiences that you had. I, even this morning, I received a message because I do a lot of channeling, and I received a message about past lives and how we hold within us the memories of our past lives that are actually helping us to rebirth society so that there's less of the division and more of the coming together
Yes.
because we have all lived those individual roles.
That's what's so, to me, one of the most powerful things about the whole concept of reincarnation. And I always tell people, like, it's like you said, science fiction. You can read a time travel book, doesn't mean you believe in time travel, right? And you can read a reincarnation, love story, and it doesn't mean you have to believe in reincarnation and still enjoy the story. And I always say to people, I don't really care if you believe it or not, right? But if it opens the mind into some other possibilities, then it's done something powerful. In fact, the tagline for my novels is lose yourself in the fiction, find yourself in the truth.
Mm,
And so
interesting.
it really is about hopefully, there's three compliments you get as a writer. One is I couldn't put it down. I stayed up all night, right? The second one is I stayed on one page for 3 days. Like this just blew me away. I gotta process. This was like profound wisdom. And then when people say they read it more than once and got something different every time, those are, I guess, the three biggest compliments. But yeah, it's for me, the most powerful thing about reincarnation is that in fact, I have a quote from a song that I wrote, we're everyone we've ever been, everywhere, and every when. And that we've probably been every race, and we've probably been different nationalities, and we've been different socioeconomic levels, and we've been all these different kind of aspects. We may have had a lifetime where we had a disability, and we may have had a lifetime where it was easy peasy and nothing, problems. Um, and so when you start looking at that, like how can you be, racist? How can you be against this religion? How can you be? Because you probably had that experience somewhere.
Yeah,
Um,
and that was the recognition that I received today, kind of that
yeah.
remembering that, oh, we don't have to feel so different from one another because we have all had these different experiences. I find it fascinating that you enjoyed Richard Bach's books because it feels like you're doing what he did.
Oh, that would be that's like the biggest compliment ever. If I could even reach anyone a fraction of how he reached people. It just so amazing what he was able to do in his writing and how it had affected me. So that would be really beautiful. So I want to hear more when you're saying, you got this message about reincarnation and how, these memories are coming up for us to heal. I'm just putting words in your mouth, but or paraphrasing.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of curious because there's also a lot of talk about like people that may have not originated on Earth, but this might be their first lifetime here. And that might be coming in. I mean, do you have any of that kind of awareness? Is that coming into any of the messaging?
Not specifically, although I do feel like there is a lot more going on than, obviously than we're aware of. But just this idea that we I think from a human perspective, it's really hard for us to wrap our mind around that we are all one, that
Yeah.
we are all part of the same thing. Like we use these different we use these different frameworks to try to wrap our brain around it. For example, we're all part of the ocean and we're a drop, or we're all part of the hand and we're each a finger, or we're all part of the tree and we're each a branch. I mean, we use those type of metaphors to try to wrap our head around that. But I found it really interesting to think about it in terms of that it may be easier than we realize, because to to begin to meld our society in a more cohesive way, because we do have these shared memories, but some of those memories have been lost. And as energy continues to increase and more awakening is happening, some of those memories are going to come to the surface, and we're not going to feel so separate from each other. We're going to feel like we have more shared history than we realize. So that is that's the perspective that I gained as I was contemplating that this morning. I, as you were talking about, science fiction, all of these different things, my mind went to Albert Einstein. I just really feel like he was a enlightened being that was bringing not only scientific knowledge to this world, but was bringing a broader perspective for humanity. I don't know if you have any thoughts about his role in what we're experiencing here, but I'd just be curious if you did.
Yeah, as soon as you said him, of course, what when I've gotten actually listened to it back to back, but Project Hail Mary, the audiobook, I haven't seen the movie yet, but the book I love so much, right? And there's so much physics and like relativity and time and all this perspective of all that stuff that he had. And like how did he tune into that? Right? Because in that book, he to the other planet didn't know relativity. They had not gotten that insight, right? And it also kind of reminds me of, and this is just some of the stuff that I'm like in the wishing research too, is where is that information coming from, right? And there's one of my favorite quotes is from Bob Dylan, and he says that song was there before I came around. I just wrote it down, right? And Liz
100%.
Gilbert, who wrote Eat, Pray, Love, talks about these ideas as orbs, and they're there, and they land on the right person,
Yes.
and when you mention Einstein, I also kind of flash back to a hero of mine from before that. And actually, I write him as a character in my novel just because I admire him so much, was Giordano Bruno. I don't know if you knew who he was.
Not familiar, no.
Um, there is a big statue in Rome of him. He was burned at the stake because he said the earth went around the sun.
Mm,
And so he followed Copernicus. He was a big believer in reincarnation, and he said the universe is infinite. I mean, he had these like really beautiful insights. And then I also kind of in that book, because I go back to all these past lives, I even go back as far as Pythagoras, who saw that, planets were spheres. And like 2,500 years ago, he had these insights. And like, where are these people getting it? And I'm going to totally divert back to the science, because the thing that's been really that I've been focusing on the last couple of weeks, especially, is because as a storyteller, as a creative person, like where do those ideas come from? And um, the idea of, and I'm getting ready to do a TEDx talk actually, and I'm going to mention like, look out for the shower scene, and they're going to go, what do you mean by the shower scene? But um, Aaron Sorkin, you know him, he's a writer, screenwriter, and won Academy Awards and everything else. And when he's in writing mode, he will take up to 7 showers a day.
wow.
And what's happening from a science standpoint, this is the stuff I'm learning. Like, I want everybody to know I'm not a scientist. I'm a storyteller that got into science, right? So I'm learning this. Like, I might be a step ahead of some people, and there are people who are leaps and years ahead of me. But that's turning on a part of your brain called the default mode network, which is the part that other parts turn off, and that turns on when you're not paying attention. But that's where those ideas and answers come to you. And I know Thomas Edison would kind of take a nap in a chair and hold a steel ball in his hand, and then as he started to nod off, he would drop it, and that would wake him up, and his ideas would come to him. So I, as actually yesterday or the day before, was actually working on like, what's a meditation to tap into that? Because it's not TM where you're getting rid of all thoughts. And it's not a guided meditation where you're guided to find thoughts, but it is a place to, how do you guide to that particular tap of energy that opens up. And if you want to use physics, it's non-locality, it's some sort of message or energy or information that's outside of us, right? And of course, you know that, right? That's what you do. You know
Yeah.
exactly what that is. And what would that be if people could start really knowing what that is and how to tap into it? And then if you say, well, yeah, and it's science, and here's the science to do it, a lot more people that might not be into it might be like, oh, well, wait a minute. Aaron Sorkin's a brilliant writer. He wrote A Free Few Good Men and The West Wing and, The Social Network. I mean, he's genius. If he takes a shower, I'm going to take a shower. Uh,
Yeah.
but there's so much interesting stuff like that, right? We're just tapping into this beautiful information.
Well, it's fascinating that you're bringing this up because I had a memory yesterday that I'd forgotten about for years. And I was homeschooling my children. I homeschooled my children for many years, and my oldest daughter at the time, like she has four kids and she's all grown up now. But at the time, she was, I think, eighth grade. She was studying logic, and she had a bunch of younger brothers and sisters who I was busy with. And she got to a lesson and she didn't understand it. And she brought it to me and said, "Can you explain this?" Well, I didn't understand the lesson. I read through it and I truly was like, I don't even know. And then suddenly, not only did the understanding come to me, but the way to teach it differently than what was being told in the textbook.
Oh,
And it
wow.
was completely out of the blue because it wasn't referencing old information that I had. It was referencing something larger than what I had previously thought. Because in my mind, previous to this experience, I thought we were just tapping into, knowledge that we received, but maybe had laid dormant, or, oh, yeah, I remember how to do that algebra, or, yeah, I remember how to spell that word, that type of thing. But this was completely different than that. And
It feels different. Like,
yeah,
it's different, right?
yeah.
It's not like, oh, well, maybe I learned this somewhere. Like, no, I didn't. Right.
Yeah, I'd never taken a logic class. I'd never even. So it was really one of those moments that surprised me. The other thing that some of what you were saying reminded me of was, and I teach this to people, is this idea of capturing your ideas as soon as you wake up in the morning.
That's
And
very important.
I end up laying in bed for probably an hour or two after I wake up, just writing down capturing all the thoughts that are coming up before I start delving into content for the day, and before I start interacting with other things. And that gives you, and I like to compare it to, as an artist, facing a blank canvas is really challenging. But we're really not facing a blank canvas every day because we're receiving this information as we wake up if we'll capture it.
Well, and then that's where it's so fun to find out the science of that, right? Because there's certain parts of your brain when you're looking at that blank canvas or that blank spreadsheet or Word document while you're writing whatever you're writing or whatever that is, and you're looking at that, you got certain parts of your brain, and that those parts of your brain that are on are shutting down the parts that are going to give that information to you. So knowing how to switch one off and the other on and to understand that because some of the writing experts say no, just write, keep writing, and I'm like, no, most writers will know we need a break, we need something, whatever that is, and then that can bring us back to, oh, well, here's the answer to that. It's like when you forget a word and then all of a sudden you walk in the next room and the word comes. I mean,
You wake up
that's
in the middle of the night.
that's right. And that's science. I mean, that's like, it's not, we all kind of know that phenomenon, but when we know it from science standpoint, then you can think, okay, and this is literally what I was just working on yesterday Wednesday was like, how can I create a meditation that would get you there,
I love that.
that could guide you there, right? And that would be really, really fun to do because there is that information. And then I don't know if you ever read the book by Jill Bolte Taylor, My Stroke of Insight.
I saw her TED Talk. I haven't read the book, but yes, fascinating.
Well, what she talks about in the book is she had a stroke and it was in her left brain. So she
Hmm.
was left with only right brain. And with only right brain and having the left brain turned off, and she was a neuroanatomist, right? So she knew what was happening to her brain while it was happening to her brain, which makes her story so powerful. But she had no concept of like, she was in a hospital, she could hear every voice in the whole hallway at equal volume. There was no discernment between
No
them,
filtering.
no filtering, and she felt this connection to this other place, right? And so like what they're talking about, and when some of the research on the um uh uh I can't remember what the DMT, right? And people doing DMT, and that opens up, there's like some connection because they know they're getting information that's not inside of them. Somehow they're doing that research, right? Um,
So when
and
you say
so
DMT, share what that stands for.
Yeah, some people there's three different ways to access DMT, as I understand it. Dimethyl trichlor, I don't know what, one of those words. And somebody's listening, going, "It's this, Brownell." But that's okay.
Put it in the
I know
comments.
I'm not the scientist, right? In the comments. But we have it naturally in our bodies, and we can access it in meditation.
Okay,
Some people choose to access it, chemically, and ayahuasca is one way to do it for the people that are doing ayahuasca, which is a plant medicine, and basically they're blending two plants, and those two plants together
right.
can open that. And then another method for doing it is uh, bufo, if you've ever heard of bufo.
Mhm.
And it comes from a toad venom, believe it or not. I did bufo twice in Spain because it's legal there. I would never, please don't ever do it not legally, please, 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 because it's really, you're out, and there are lots of risks in terms of if you're not properly supervised. Um, but I was medically supervised, legal, the whole thing, and you do feel like you're opening, like there's some message coming to you, and you live that, right? I mean, that's what you do, right? So you
Yeah,
know what it's like to get messages from outside.
right.
And I think most of us do. This is just kind of an interesting, profound. And the thing about ayahuasca lasts for several hours because it's in your body, whereas bufo lasts for 20 minutes. So it's a really intense 20-minute experience, but it's not lasting for that. But it was just like you talking about with the dream. I'm writing down everything I can remember from that. And that
Hmm.
otherwise it kind of fleets in. But there's science on that, how it's opening up the neural pathways of the brain. It's helping people with addiction. It's helping people with PTSD. It's helping people with Alzheimer's. And I mean, like really interesting stuff what they're doing, to work, to play with the brain. So anyway,
Wow.
we went
Wow.
off into
You
that.
you are you are an encyclopedia of fascinating information. I want to go back into your story because we
Yeah,
kind of hopped over
yeah,
into some of this metaphysical science,
yeah.
beyond science, beyond otherworldly topics.
Otherworld.
But
Yeah,
but how did you get from where you were, where you had this interest, to what you're doing now? What
yeah.
was that bridge?
Yeah, and that was so what's my break, or at least my most recent kind of experience in that was a couple of years ago, and I was actually doing the editing for the novel that the trilogy that I mentioned, and a friend of mine's like this said, you need to write this story, and I thought, okay, I'll write the story even though I'm supposed to be working on the other one, and I'm writing the story, and I thought I'm going to write it from the point of view of the upstairs. So I thought, if you're up there and your guides or what angels or whatever you want to call them, right? But you're up there and you're looking at us humans going, what are y'all doing now? What is happening? And I just thought that would be a fun perspective to write it from. And I thought, no, I'm going to write it about my story. So it's about them, my guides, if you will, and looking at this. I call her Nell, so it's not exactly veiled, but it's definitely semi-autobiographical because there's true stuff, and then there's also stuff that's made up for sure. And then there's stuff that might be true that I didn't know, but thought I was making it up. Um, but it were two guides up there that was writing about, and two what I call traffic angels. And a traffic angel, and what was happening at the time is I had gone from I'd gotten my kicked out of my apartment, or my rent was increased 50% living in Colorado. So like 50% increase, that's enough of an impetus to say it's time to find something else. So
Yeah.
I thought, well, I'm going to go to Italy because I was writing about Italy. And and then I found out I couldn't stay in Italy more than 3 months, so I had to go somewhere else outside of the EU. So I went to Tunisia,
Wow.
which is not your average American, tourist destination, right? And what happened to me there is, I met a man and it was like, okay, how do you get an American woman living in Colorado to meet a British man in Tunisia?
Wow.
And those
Yes.
traffic angels had to work hard to do that. They had to kick me out of my apartment. They had to make the whole visa problem in Italy not work, the apartment not work in Italy, and get me to Tunisia of all places, and have me like going through all of these experiences. And as I'm writing about these characters, because they're like, well, what's going to happen to those humans? Because they can't control us, they can only offer opportunities.
Right,
Um,
right.
and I'm realizing like I'm writing them, and they're like, no, wait a minute, they're telling me who they are.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
So it was a really interesting way to open up that kind of messaging from them and kind of get their frustration about me from their perspective that I'm writing. And that's what led to, and that one I wrote like a kind of, it's written in 4 parts because life is like that, right? So, it was like, here's part one, this is this part of the story. And then, several months later, I wrote part two. And then several months later, I wrote part three. And then, um, and then I thought I'm going to write this part four, which was different, but it was happening. I was wishing for something,
Mm,
and I was thinking about wishing, and I was like had this idea. So I thought, oh, I'm going to write about wishing. Like, how are wishes answered, and is there a realm up there where wishes come in? And I called them wish fairies, and like they rush to go answer the wishes, and then they'd sort them and decide, are we, yes, what are the four responses to a wish, and how does that work? And so all of that kind of stuff was coming to me. And then, like I said before, I listen to science lectures when I can't sleep. Last night was about quantum consciousness, and I was like, okay, I'm really awake now. But so I was doing that, and it didn't put me to sleep. It actually woke me up, literally and figuratively. And then that's why I was like, I'm going to do some research on the science of wishing, and so that's where I just started digging in, and it got me to where I am now, which I really do feel like that was another, okay, how many closed doors did I have to run into to get me down this path? As I think of them as like border collies that are like, I'm going to whack you in the side until you go the direction we want you to go. You want to go that way, fine, but we're going to block you and send you this other way, you
yeah.
know? And
What
so
what
that's
is
what's been going on. Yeah.
what is your thoughts about pre-birth planning or soul planning?
I have very clear information on that. Now, that doesn't mean, but somebody else can disagree with me, and that's fine. But I very clearly believe, and actually talk about it in my first book I wrote, which was 20 years ago, believe it or not. And that one's called Five Reasons Why Bad Things Happen. So when people
Mhm.
say everything happens for a reason, I'm like, yeah, I wrote the book on it. And so in that one, I explained that my perspective, because I say if you understand this perspective and you're in alignment with it, then all the five reasons, everything can be explained. But if you don't, then it's hard to fit you in my framework. So that's why I have to set up that established, kind of view. But I believe that before we're born, we have a soul that existed before we were born and will exist after we die. And you can believe that's one life or multiple lives. In that book, I didn't discern, but I do believe that we have multiple lives. But when we're planning the life, then we make some decisions, and they're key things that we want to learn, people we want to encounter, um, you know, different pathways, different options, different choices that we might have. And I think that's our first opportunity for free will, right? Is that we're planning these things. So we choose a family, we choose a body that's going to be the best situation, DNA wise, family wise, dynamics wise, challenges, a lot of those things. We choose that dynamic for us to hopefully get this path, right? So that's our first area of free will. And then we get here, and it's like a roadmap. So what we've created is a roadmap, but then once we get here, it's up to us to decide, are we taking a right turn, left turn? Are we zooming through an intersection? Or are we going to sit there for years and years? Do we keep taking right turns and just go in circles? Do we take the high road or the low road? Because, both paths will teach us something, but one will be more pleasant. And so I think that's where, like, that's the fate in free will. Once we're here, is the fate was sort of what we planned in advance. In fact, I even wrote a children's book that's called Sometimes I Wonder. And there's a line in there. It's like, we decide on our lessons, the paths we will take, awards we might go for, and mistakes we might make. For life isn't easy and not always fun, but easy is boring, like games always won. So we set up our challenges and reach for the sky. It doesn't much matter if we get to the top. What matters much more is what we do when we stop. So that's kind of
Wow.
how I envision that, right?
I love that so much. What's the name of that book again?
Sometimes I wonder.
Sometimes I wonder.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Love that so much. What
Yeah.
are some of the other, you mentioned the 5 reasons why bad things happen. What are some of the other reasons why bad things happen? Because I think so many, myself included, so many of my guests have gone through really challenging things, which put them on this intense spiritual path,
Right.
which I imagine is one of the reasons why
That
bad
that's
things
right. That's
happen.
the well, yeah. And the thing that they all have in common, I'm happy to tell you all five or however many you want to hear. But the thing they all have in common is to get us to change something. So whatever's happening, it's something to get us down to another path. And there's always a why is my foundational belief. You don't have to, nobody has to agree with me, but that's, you can answer in the comments though. Do you think there's always a why? But it's always to get us to change something. So we're going down a specific direction, and we need those border collies are trying to get us back on path. And so the first reason is subconscious sabotage. And the big revelation I had when I was writing that book was when I realized that the body is the subconscious.
Mhm, mhm.
And now it's not that big of a revelation, but 20 years ago, I was like, I had not ever seen that anywhere. I had not heard that anywhere. Now it's kind of like everybody's like, yeah, of course, Brownell. I was like, well, it was new to me. Um, but that's when you realize your body has its own level of consciousness, its own energy and entity. If you can imagine, like, what if my soul had chosen your body or vice versa? Then you start realizing that the body has a lot of DNA and ancestral memory and there's a lot of stuff that's consciousness built into the beings that we inhabit.
Do you
And
think the body is part of the veil that we speak of?
I would think, and they're much better experts on the veil. My gut instinct to answer is that it relates because the veil is when we are blocked from understanding that part of ourselves.
Hmm.
But I think it's actually pretty simple, and I talk about this in wishing because it's really important that your subconscious is in alignment with your wish because it can sabotage your wish, right? So it's
Right.
important. So it's like all that stuff I did 20 years ago now all of a sudden is brought into this new book and helping people going, okay, if your body's not in alignment with that wish, you can either get the wish and not be happy that you got it ultimately, or maybe you're blocked from it because your body isn't enjoying it. And there's also a lot of science and fun and how important it is to have fun. Are you familiar at all with the Huna religion? Do you know anything about that?
Sounds vaguely familiar, but no, not.
Well, everybody's heard like the big kahuna. That's kind of,
Oh,
an expression. And the kahuna is the head of the Huna tribe. So that's
okay.
what the big kahuna is actually. It's a Polynesian religion. But basically it's psychology 101. And the thing that they do differently is they have you name all three selves. So you have a name for your higher self, a name for yourself, and then a name for your body. And if there's any most profound thing that people could do is when they find the name for their body and get to know their body like on a first name basis and say, okay, what do you want to do today? Where are we? How are you in alignment with this wish? Are we on the right path? What do you want to do this week? What do you want to eat? Where do you want to go? Because so often we're forcing our body, we're treating our bodies like this slave that we have to, discipline it. And instead
Yeah.
we want to collaborate with it.
That has come through so many times as I have done readings for people, is this idea of creating that relationship with our body and becoming friends with our body. Really, I just find that really interesting the way that you express that. So thank you.
Yeah, well, my favorite example for that, and I feel free to take this because I think this is something people can really relate to, is you can imagine like you see either you're walking your dog or you see a neighbor walking their dog, right? And the dog runs off. What do they usually do?
Call
They
it back.
usually yell at the dog or chase the dog, right? But instead, if you go, hey, it's fun over here, the dog's going to go, yay, I'm over here. I'll go where you want to go. I mean, always, right? It's better over here. There's another squirrel over this way, or whatever it is, right? And that's what we need to do with our bodies. Like, it's going to be fun over here. Let's work together. Like, how can I make it fun? And even if you've got something that's not fun, like a huge task you have to do, got to work it out, then at least make sure you say, body, like, okay, I'm going to do this task and I'm going to work really hard on it. And then if we can get it done by noon, then we can have the afternoon off and have fun. And then your body won't sabotage you so much. You'll be able to focus and get that task done. It's really incredible.
Yes, yes. I can see that. You know, as you're explaining different things, I am feeling this connection with other things that I have taught people about communicating or cooperating with our circumstances. And you're explaining it, differently, but it's because I've done a lot of work in the grief field.
Mhm. I was a hospice volunteer for many years, so I have a little bit of a
Okay.
relationship to that. Yeah.
So a lot of times I would explain to people, you can you can ask those emotions to, if it's not appropriate in that moment, to feel or express those emotions because you're on air as a broadcaster or something, right? Like, this is probably not the time to have a total breakdown. And you can ask it to go off and sit in the green room,
Mm.
and you can come back and invite that emotion back in later. But if you don't invite it back in later, then you're creating basically a hostage situation
I like the way you said
instead
that.
of
Yeah.
a, gentle, can you, I am definitely going to address this. I'm coming back. Anyway, I don't know what made me think of that, but I loved the way that you talked about that. And it made me think of that scenario where we can cooperate with the experiences that we're having in our body, but we can't just say we're not building trust
Right.
if we say, I'm going to deal with that, and then we never come back and deal with it.
That's right. That's right. And the I use a similar thing where it's like, especially there's at middle of the night and I can't get this thing off my mind and I just like playing, replaying, replaying. And from a science standpoint, some of it is just your brain is programmed to keep thinking about that same thing and you just need to reprogram it. Not, some of it's very simple, just programming, right? You just neuroplasticity. But some of it is this is an important thing, but I need to get to sleep kind of thing. And I will take the whatever the worry is and I'll put it in a box in the neighbor's closet on the upper shelf in their closet, right? So I'm saying, look, it's still there, and we're going to access it, but
Metaphorically, you're not actually
I'm
breaking
not
into the
literally
neighbor's
getting
house.
up and going to breaking into the neighbor's house. But it's like it's safe. It's there. I can access it again. It's not. I'm not telling you it's not important information. When it's important, it'll come up. It's just not serving right now. So yeah, that's one way to kind of look at that. I'm curious when I explained the how I think things are planned. Where do you stand on that? How do you feel about that?
Very similarly, one of the questions I had as you were talking about that was, I don't feel like every bad thing that happens to us, what we see as bad, are necessarily trying to get us back on track, but just bigger events in our life that were planned before we came. And knowing that it was going to be disruptive, but also knowing that it was going to bring us to a better place. So, for example, my children, passed away in a rollover car accident
Mm.
in on Mother's Day in 2007. And
Wow.
I look at that now. There's so many circumstances, which I won't go into right now, around that experience that causes me to realize and believe, other people don't need to believe it, but to truly believe that we planned this before we came, that their exit point was going to be when they were younger, and that was going to create a disruption. But I don't believe that it happened to get me back on path. It happened because it was part of our life plan. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. And I guess if I was to reword what I said as far on path, there was a lesson that you signed up to learn, and that lesson opened up doors that took you to that path. So,
Exactly. Yeah.
so that, I guess that this is just another way to kind of reword the same kind of thing.
Yeah, for
But
sure.
yeah, that's and when you kind of can realize that, do you remember the book When Bad Things Happen to Good People?
Yeah, yes, but
Yeah.
it's been
Well,
too
what was
long ago,
interesting
true.
about my book is I actually had the honor of meeting Rabbi Kushner, who wrote that book.
Okay.
And he read my book and he came back and he said, "No, I think it's all random." Like he didn't think things happen for a reason,
Oh, wow.
which was like, you know. And it led me to do some more research and actually found the research is that the people who believe things happen for a reason are happier than people who don't.
Mm,
And one of the other things that you're kind of talking about that I didn't talk about in my first book, but I am talking about in the most recent one is a concept that I call reverse optimism,
mm.
which when you can look back and go, oh, that happened to live that happened so that would happen, so that got me here, and
Yes.
that's a form of self-efficacy, which is why people feel, are happier that believe things happen for a reason, because you believe there's some control or influence that you have. Because if it's completely chaotic and random, you never know when that asteroid can hit your house, and then you might be in this kind of phrase. But the idea of reverse optimism, I think, is something I would love people to to understand and comprehend, in that if you can look back at that, then and you can get a habit of understanding and go, okay, yes, that was, ooh, that was, I don't want to go through that again, and yes, that was awful, and yes, this happened, and these kinds of things. So I'm not, no matter what people are going through, diminishing what they're going through,
Right,
in
right.
any way. I'm hoping.
And whether something happens because it's getting us back on our path, or whether something happens because it was planned because of a lesson, in our humanness, we still need to go through the process of
Yes.
integrating that experience.
Yes, and it's easier and a less painful process if we can see it that way, and we can know that, and we can have some uh, um, self-empowerment and self-awareness to go, this might, if this might actually be taking me somewhere positive, because if I look back on all these other things that I thought were awful and they actually opened up, this relationship ended, but then I met the best person that could possibly be for me, or I was in this I was in a situation with healing with somebody, and I said, why did it happen? And boom, he's like, it's because I was doing the wrong job. I mean, his higher self just totally answered the question. He didn't know what he was saying. He had no idea consciously what he was saying, but he just came in and go, it happened this way, and I was supposed to be doing this, and now I'm doing this, and this is why this happened.
Exactly.
Like, and then he kind of popped out of it, like, where did that come from? I don't know what I just said, right? I mean, it was really profound, right? But I think that if we get to that place, then I'm not diminishing the pain, but it can minimize it, because if you can get to the lesson, you can get to the healing. If you can get to the why, you can get to the lesson, you can get to the healing, and then you can go, okay, this, I was talking with somebody not long ago, and one of their parents died right in front of them, like as a teenager. And they said they always kind of knew, like you said, like they always kind of knew that they didn't even have a huge grieving situation, because they knew it would have been pre-planned, and they had already gotten that message, and like they just had this sense of knowing, and it sent them to another country. I mean, another state, and a whole nother situation, and it opened up a path that wasn't open that before.
Wow.
And so that's a huge thing. And I don't think I could just tell from the energy of this person, they weren't making that up. Like, it wasn't like
Yeah.
they were
Yeah.
glossing over and going, "Oh, it was supposed to happen, but I'm still like hate people or hate this or
Yeah.
so mad
Yeah,
about
there's a
it or
difference between
whatever."
what we might call spiritual bypassing and
Yes.
actually integrating and creating some understanding. And actually, as you were saying that, it almost felt like they had a shared death experience
Yeah.
to get to that place as quickly as they did. I've heard of other people who've had that type of experience. I'm right now I'm reading one of Neil Donald Walsh's books, and he talks about something that happened in his work and how he became ill, and
Mhm.
his illness was a reason, gave him an excuse. He actually lost his job because of his illness. I don't even know if that could happen today.
Probably, sadly, but
Yeah, but he lost his job because of his illness. He wasn't able to do the job, and it was going to be months. And interestingly enough, he started getting well a lot faster than everybody was expecting him to. Looking back, he's like, I was in the wrong position at the wrong time. My body like created this experience so that I could exit and have this other experience. I really want to talk about this book on wishes.
yeah.
When I hear the word wishes, I think of, blowing out birthday candles.
Yeah.
So when you're talking about wishes, what does that mean to you, or what is the definition or the um yeah, I'm just curious what that is that when you think of wishes, what is that?
Yeah. Um, well, what I had to do is, like, when I was writing the book, was I was thinking, I got to define it, right? I got to understand it, because
Exactly.
everyone does it all over the world, every culture since the beginning of time, right? We've all had wishing, and we used to have a lot of wishing rituals, right? People would be wishing together, right? And I think that's one of my kind of wishes, is that we would wish, like, we say that word a lot more often than we think, by the way. And it's such a beautiful word. It's like wish, and wishes have this lightness to them, beyond what somebody thinks. So that's one of the things I love about it, is like rethinking it. But I had to decide, what's the difference between a wish, a prayer, and a goal.
Yeah.
Do you want to guess, or do you want me to just?
No, I would love for you to share with us.
Okay. Well, a goal is generally something in your control. Like, I can have this goal, I have this plan, I'm going to take this vacation, I'm going to save up for this, I'm going to whatever this kind of, I'm going to run a marathon, whatever it is. So that's in your control. And prayers are usually for things
Or we
outside.
think it's in our control.
Well, yeah, there's always an element. That's where I'll get to that. You're just ahead of me. Um, but then there's prayers are for things outside of your control. Like, there's nothing more you can
Mhm.
do. You're praying. You're sending it to whatever higher power, whatever energy, you're praying for that. And wishes occupy a beautiful middle ground, between goals and prayers. There is always an element of what I call cosmic collaboration, right? The word cosmic is really an incredible word. If you look it up in Merriam-Webster, it's like the three elements to the definition. The first one is universal. The second one is it's metaphysical or spiritual. And the third part of the definition is comprehensiveness.
Mhm.
And so the big principle of my book is, the more you understand the science of wishing, you can turn your wishes into what I call cosmic wishes, which brings more into your control. So you start getting a much clearer understanding of that. And so that's that bridge. You're talking about the Venn diagram. That's the Venn diagram of that, between prayers and goals. And you're right, not every goal is completely in our control. There's always going to be some sort of outside thing, and sometimes it could be, we have a goal of this plan that's not right for us. And that was one of the things that was important to me to put in the book, is to get into the three selves and the subconscious, and all that is an important part in there. Also, the four responses and how wishes are answered. And there's even a chapter on this toxic positivity and spiritual bypassing and these beliefs of like, well, you didn't do it right if you didn't get it, because you all you had to do was this and it's going to happen. And it's like, yeah, but there's more nuance than that, right? There's
Right.
things that we are glad didn't happen, or we got down another path. And to get clear between what, the difference between what you want and what you need, because I was literally just talking to somebody the other day, and said, oh, $1 million. It's like, that's hard for you to manifest, right? Because once you get clear on your wish, and then you repeat it, and if you use a ritual, whether it's see a time on the clock, or I have somebody, every time you see a mirror, you're going to make your wish, some repetitive thing that's going to reprogram your brain neuroplasticity, that it's going to be part of who you are once you repeat it enough times. And research differs, but somewhere between the 4 to 8 weeks, literally 1 minute a day. But I was trying to guide him, like, what's the $1 million for, right? Because what do you need? Not what you want. A lot of movies, I don't know what your favorite movies are, but a lot of movies start out with a character and they want something really badly. And by the time the end of the movie, it's like they didn't get exactly what they started out wanting, but they got something better. They learned
Mm,
something, or they ended up wanting something different. Like movie Legally Blonde. I don't know if you know that movie, but
yeah.
she starts out, I'm going to marry this guy. I'm going to marry this guy. And by the end, she's like, I don't want that guy. you know,
Wishes that we're glad don't come true.
yes, yes. And she wanted to marry Warner, but what she needed was to stand on her own 2 feet and find her own power, right? So she had to go through that path and that journey to get there. A lot of that stuff is really important nuances to understand about wishes. And so the more you do, the more you can go, okay, if I have a ritual, because that's anthropology, and I repeat it, that's neuroplasticity. All of a sudden, I've added sciences that turn on a part of your brain called the reticular activating system. I don't know if you
Hmm.
know about that, but for the listeners, and if you know more about this, feel free to correct me or add, because I always like learning from new people. But is basically, it's like if you think I'm going to buy a Jeep, I just decide I'm going to buy a Jeep. All of a sudden, you'll see Jeeps everywhere. Your
Right.
brain starts programming to look for the solution. And $1 million is hard to imagine you're going to get a check with a bunch of zeros. But for him, we could reformat it to what did he really want, and what's the purpose of the $1 million, and how can he turn that into a need? And it turned into this full wish. That was something that people can start, like, he can manifest, and he can get other people supporting him in that wish. And maybe, like, one of the things I want to do is get people to have these collective wishing experiences and unify behind common wishes.
Yes. And creating the world that we truly want to live in. What is the connection between wishes and intention?
Well, certainly there is an intention that goes into a wish, right? I talk about, and I strongly recommend what I call the 3 Ps. That the wish should be peaceful, positive, and purposeful.
Mm,
And it should come from a peaceful, positive, and purposeful place too. Like where you are physiologically as you're making the wish, are you peaceful? Are you feeling positive? And also, the wish should be positive. So instead of wishing against or wishing protesting is wishing against, really, we need to be wishing for. We need to be uniting for world peace. We need to be uniting for whatever this vision is that you know, uh, you know, somebody wants to do a wish circle for, a better place for animals, a healthier planet for animals or something like that. So then we've got something we can work for, right? And we can work toward together.
love that. Beautiful. Brunel, is there anything we haven't talked about that you wanted to make sure that we talked about, and then also share how people can connect with you? Yeah.
Well, there's a lot, of course, we could probably keep talking about. I did mention the blue balloon, so I'm just going to give you a quick headline on that, because I didn't want to tease your listeners, and then
Yes. Love it.
they're like, what's she talking about, a blue balloon? So I figured I might as well book in that, and then answer your question. And it's a lot. It could be, we could probably talk for an hour on the blue balloon phenomena, and it's something I kind of came up with. But imagine you're driving home and you have this image of a blue balloon in your driveway. Like, you just get this pop up of an image of the blue balloon. And then you go home and you drive up, and guess what? There's a blue balloon in your driveway. What happened?
Mm.
And the answer is there's like 10 different possibilities that could have happened that made that blue balloon there. And some will say, I manifested it. I saw it, I created it, and I manifested it. And that's one possible answer. There's also maybe your subconscious saw it because your subconscious sees 11 million images, or gets 11 million messages in a second, whereas our conscious mind only gets 50 or something like that. Um, it could be a message from beyond. It could be a symbol that you're supposed to be looking for. It could be a message from somebody loved one that's passed over. I mean, it could be, there's literally probably at least 10 or 12 possible answers. But I like that example because, and I'll let the listeners, you tell me what you think the blue balloon is if you want to comment what made that happen and if you had that experience. Because when you do that, you start realizing that the question about what is intention or manifestation or any of this, there are so many other possible answers. And the more we kind of understand the possible answers, the more fun we can have with this whole dynamic of getting what we want and creating the world we want. So that I wanted to kind of at least mention that.
Yeah,
Um,
beautiful.
yeah, and I'm Brownell Landrum. I'm the only Brownell Landrum in the world. So it's pretty easy to find me. I'm on all my books are on Amazon and Apple Books and those places. And I have a Facebook group called Life is a Trip Reincarnation Stories. So if anybody's into that, and I know you joined, so we're happy to have you. And I want to invite people to join that. And then I'm on, I'm going to really be building a big YouTube channel soon. So look out for that. And of course, I'm on TikTok and Facebook and all those other things too, Instagram.
Fabulous, fabulous. Oh, this has been such a fun conversation. It's been a little bit like being at the metaphysical carnival because we've just kind of bounced from here, from this ride to that ride to this ride.
It's funny. Actually, somebody took me through a life between lives regression, and it was a carnival. Well, it was a roller coaster, and it was an amusement park, but it's the same kind of analogy. So it's funny you mentioned that. That's what I saw on the other side. Was like there was some people working the mechanics from behind the scenes.
Yeah, and we could literally talk all day. One of the questions I like to ask all my guests before I let you go is, what are some of the practices that you do that keep you connected to the spiritual, or you know, h- what are your practices that you like to do?
Yeah, well, I mean, I do different kinds of meditation. Sometimes I do TM if I get too much on my mind. Now that I have the language of the default mode network that's working when I'm not working, it's like I know all of a sudden why I go to the gym and all my ideas are flowing through me.
Hmm.
And have either I've gotten to be a big fan of Claude AI, so that's my new friend. So I can just say, "Hey, Claude, write this down and don't let me forget." I've got this idea while I'm working on the elliptical machine today. But or a voice recorder or something like you said when you're waking up, some way to capture that, because there's probably a lot of information coming to you that you're like that you might just feel like a little bit out of your grasp, and it's right there for you to access if you just know how. So I guess that would be the answer.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing all of your, well, I'm not even going to say all of your insights, but some of your insights, because I can tell that there's just a lot there. So I would encourage people to go out there and find your books. We'll have your links in the show notes. And thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, I had a blast.